You know, it's pretty wild when you think about it. How can two rulers from the exact same family end up with reputations that are polar opposites? One is remembered as a literal saint, the guy who built a nation. The other, his own son, is known only as a brother killer, a villain so evil his name basically became a curse. So we're going to dive into this really dark and fascinating piece of history, the story of Vladimir the Great and Sviatopolk the Accursed. And we're going to ask a really important question. Are these labels the actual truth, or just the story the winner wanted everyone to hear?
I mean, look at this. On one side, you have Vladimir the Great, a saint, a nation builder. And on the other, his successor, Sviatopolk, forever stuck with the nickname the Accursed, a sinner defined by murder. The difference is just night and day. But you and I both know history is almost never that simple, right? To really get how Sviatopolk got that terrible name, and to figure out if he even deserved it, we first have to go back and understand the incredible legacy of the father he had to follow.
Okay, so before all the bloody family drama, there was the empire. And that empire was pretty much the life's work of one man, Vladimir. But here's the twist. The guy who would eventually become a saint, he didn't start out that way. Not even close. His story actually begins with blood, pure ambition, and just raw pagan brutality.
And it's honestly shocking how far Vladimir was from that saintly image we have of him. He was the illegitimate son of a prince and a housekeeper, and that background seemed to light a fire under him. The old stories say he kept over 700 concubines, and get this, when he wanted to marry a Viking princess named Rurikid and she turned him down because of his low birth, his reaction was, well, savage. He stormed her father's city, killed her father and two brothers right in front of her, and then forced her to marry him. This wasn't some thoughtful statesman. This was a warlord who, after taking power from his own brother, supposedly celebrated by sacrificing hundreds of people to his pagan god.
So the big question is, how does that guy become Vladimir the Great? The answer is one single massive decision that changed the course of European history, the baptism of Rus. In the year 988, Vladimir tossed out the old gods and decided his entire kingdom would become Christian. This one act transformed Kievan Rus from a bunch of warring pagan tribes into a powerful, unified Christian empire. It literally set the course for that part of the world for the next 1,000 years. But his reasons for doing it were, let's just say, very practical.
Right, so Vladimir didn't just have some sudden epiphany. According to the old chronicles, he literally went shopping for a religion. He had representatives from the world's great faiths come and pitch him. He turned down Islam because, and this is a famous line, he said that giving up alcohol was just not going to fly with his people. He dismissed Judaism because he couldn't wrap his head around a God who would let his chosen people get kicked out of their homeland. Roman Catholicism was a possibility, but then he found out he'd have to answer to the Pope in Rome. And for a guy like Vladimir, yeah, giving up that kind of power was a deal breaker. But Byzantine Orthodoxy? That was the sweet spot. He'd get a powerful alliance with Constantinople, and this is the key, the ruler of the country was also the head of the church. For a man obsessed with control, it was perfect.
But it wasn't just about politics, you know? It was about the show, the spectacle of it all. When Vladimir sent his guys out to check out these different religions, they weren't too impressed by the mosques or the German cathedrals. But then they walked into the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and they were just blown away. The giant dome, the gold everywhere, the smell of incense, the incredible choir. It was like nothing they had ever seen. The report they gave Vladimir was just breathless. They said they didn't know if they were in heaven or on earth. That was it. That sealed the deal.
So Vladimir, the new saint, threw the old pagan idols into the river, built churches, and ruled for 35 years. He completely remade himself and his kingdom. But in doing all that, he created one heck of a prize. So when he died in 1015, he didn't leave a clear successor. No, he left a dozen sons, all ambitious, all staring at that one big throne in Kiev. It created this huge power vacuum, and the first person to step into it was Sviatopolk.
And this is where the story gets really dark. The official version, the one people have told for centuries, is a pretty straightforward story of ambition, betrayal, and murder. It's the story of how Sviatopolk, in a ruthless grab for absolute power, washed the throne of Kiev in the blood of his own brothers and earned that infamous nickname.
Now, if you want to understand what might have been driving Sviatopolk, you've got to look at his birth. It was messy. See, his mother was a Greek nun who had been married to Vladimir's brother, Yaropolk. After Vladimir killed Yaropolk to take the throne, he took his brother's wife for himself. She was already pregnant, and she soon gave birth to Sviatopolk. So the question always lingered, was he really Vladimir's son or the son of the man Vladimir had murdered? That cloud of doubt, that question of his legitimacy, would have followed him his entire life, and maybe it made him desperate to prove he belonged on that throne, no matter the cost.
And things went down with brutal speed. As soon as Vladimir died in 1015, Sviatopolk, who was already in the capital, Kiev, grabbed power immediately. And according to the story, his brothers started dropping like flies. His brother Sviatoslav was murdered. Then came the really awful parts. Assassins were sent after two other brothers, Boris and Gleb. This bloody power grab lasted about a year, until another brother, Yaroslav, marched his own army down from the north to challenge the man he was calling a murderer.
And this is where that name comes from. See, our main source for what happened back then is a document called the Primary Chronicle. And it does not mince words. It points the finger directly at Sviatopolk, saying he ordered the murders of his three brothers to get them out of his way. It's this book that calls him Okayani, the accursed, the damned. And for pretty much 1,000 years, that was that. Case closed.
Now, what really cemented Sviatopolk's reputation as the ultimate villain was what happened to his victims. Boris and Gleb were remembered as these perfect, pious Christians. Instead of fighting back and starting a civil war, they supposedly just accepted their fate. They were killed while they were praying, which basically turned them into martyrs. The church moved fast, making them the very first native saints of the Rus. And every good story needs a hero, or in this case, saints. Their holiness was the perfect contrast to Sviatopolk's supposed evil. He wasn't just a rival anymore, he was the killer of saints.
So, that's the story we've all been told for a millennia. It's neat, it's tidy, and it has a very clear bad guy. But what if it's not the whole truth? What if the main piece of evidence against him is, well, propaganda? Modern historians have started digging into this, looking at other sources, and they've turned this open and shut case into a full-on historical whodunit.
Okay, so here's the biggest problem with the official story. That primary chronicle, the one that makes Sviatopolk out to be a monster, it wasn't written when the murders happened. It was put together almost 100 years later. And this is the most important part. It was written for the descendants of the man who won the war, Sviatopolk's brother, Yaroslav. So you have to ask yourself, could this whole thing be a brilliant piece of political propaganda? Something designed to make the guy who took the throne look like a hero?
Right, because when you start looking at sources from outside of Kiev, the story gets a whole lot messier. The local Kievan Chronicle, yeah, it points straight at Sviatopolk, but other accounts from the time tell a different story. A German chronicler from that era is pretty vague on who did it. But the real bombshell, that comes from the Norse sagas, the stories of the Viking mercenaries who actually fought for these princes.
This is where it gets really juicy. A Norse story called Eamund's Saga, which is all about the adventures of these Viking mercenaries, pins the blame for a brother's murder squarely on Yaroslav. It talks about Viking warriors in Yaroslav's pay killing his brother, who the saga calls Burislav. Now, historians argue about who Burislav was, but the implication is absolutely staggering. It suggests that Yaroslav, the guy history calls the wise, the hero of the story, might have been the one with blood on his hands all along, a ruthless killer who then framed his own brother for the crime.
And just like that, the entire narrative gets flipped upside down. All of a sudden, we have two completely different possibilities. Was Sviatopolk really the accursed prince, a monster who slaughtered his own brothers for power? Or was he the victim of the greatest smear campaign in history, framed by his ambitious brother Yaroslav, who then used his victory to literally rewrite the past, making himself the hero and Sviatopolk the villain forever? At the end of the day, the real truth of who killed whom back then is probably lost to history. But what we do know is how the war ended, and the final shape of these two men's legacies. That wasn't decided by the facts. It was decided by who was left standing when the dust settled. Because as they say, it's the winner who gets to write the history books.
And Sviatopolk, he fought like hell to keep that throne. After Yaroslav beat him the first time, he ran off to Poland and came back with a huge army from his father-in-law, the Polish king. He even managed to take back Kiev for a while, but he just couldn't hold it. After the Poles left, Yaroslav came back. Sviatopolk made one last, desperate move, teaming up with some nomadic warriors called the Pechenegs. But it just wasn't enough.
In 1019, at a place called the Battle of the Alta River, Yaroslav's army completely crushed Sviatopolk and his allies. Sviatopolk fled, a totally defeated man, and died somewhere out in the wilderness. And with his rival gone, Yaroslav the Wise became the undisputed ruler of Kiev. He went on to have this long, successful reign that's known as a golden age. And with all that power, of course, came the ability to control the story to make sure that his version of what happened became the official history. So after all that, what are the big takeaways?
First, historical figures like Vladimir the Great are super complex. He was both a brutal warlord and a visionary saint. Second, the official record paints Sviatopolk as the Accursed, a simple villain. But third, there's pretty compelling evidence from other countries that the hero of this story, Yaroslav, might have been the real killer. Fourth, and this is the most important one, Yaroslav won the war, and that victory gave him the power to shape history in his favor. And that brings us to the final point. The reputations we read about in books are often built as much on propaganda as they are on actual facts.
Which leaves us with this one last big question. The story of Sviatopolk the Accursed is this powerful reminder that history isn't always just a simple recording of events. It's a story, it's a narrative, and it's crafted by people who have agendas, who have biases, and who have everything to gain by being remembered as the good guy. It really forces us to look at any story from the past and ask ourselves, how much of what we think we know is the actual unvarnished truth, and how much of it is just the story the winner wanted us to believe?